his little. Since I got back from the last speaking trip in Serbia, which was fantastic, and between now and going to Canada in August, I'm finishing off a new book, so I'm kind of sitting here all day, every day, getting it done. And it's amazing how things move on from book to book. And there's a lot of controversial things in the new one, I can tell you. But we're going to have a look through some of the news items of this week, some of which have a familiar ring to them. And I'm going to start off with, it's a story actually that's just in the news as I am starting to record this. US-led coalition confirm airstrike on pro-government convoy in Syria, citing threat to US partner forces. Yeah, I'm sure they were a terrible threat. The US forces in Syria have bombed a militia group fighting alongside the Syrian government forces in southern Syria. The US-led coalition has confirmed. The coalition said in a statement that the Syrian forces posed a threat to US and partner troops at Tamf base near the Syrian-Iraq-Jordan border. Of course, Jordan is a satellite state of the United States. Well, what isn't? Satellite state of Israel also. And there are, it seems, major troop build-ups in Jordan. They call it a training base along the Syrian border. So this doesn't make anyone surprised who's followed that. And of course, the arrogance it takes to, and the same with Israel, but I mean they're controlled by the same force anyway, to just bomb a country where you have had no invitation to enter and be involved in terms of this war. I'll put some hair on my face. And just do it. And it's like the, 59 Tomahawk missiles fired at an airbase based on a lie about chemical weapons being used by Assad. And now you have this this group supporting Assad in a country in which Assad is the elected leader. We may think about it. There's not many leaders in Middle Eastern countries that are on the US side that are actually elected. They are self-imposed by force. And it goes on, the Syrian forces allegedly entered a so-called deconfliction zone in the Homs governorate, which was perceived as a threat to US allied troops. Absolute nonsense. And this stuff has come from people like Mad Dog Mattis, the guy who was so involved in the horrors of the US attack on Fallujah in Iraq. The attacked paramilitary group affiliated with the Syrian army has been given no warning of the strike, in contradiction to what we've heard from US sources. A political commentator from Damascus, Ala Ibrahim, said, citing military sources in Syria, the area where the attack took place has been the scene of a hectic race between the Syrian army and groups affiliated with it and the rebel groups backed by the US-led coalition. There have been reports that the US and Britain are preparing some kind of land incursion. Of course, it's just the continuation of the same story. ISIS, of course, was created by the US and Britain as a proxy army to remove Assad, which was going ever so well until the Russians came in, started supporting Assad from the air. And every effort is being taken to undermine the Syrian army to allow the original plan of Assad being removed to be justified. And they're there on the border, just itching to go in and kill some more people. I mean, they need their fix of dead people and violence. And speaking of that chemical attack, this is another story this week. Terrorist confesses to taking part in staged chemical attacks in Syria Western media silent? Well, of course they would be. This is on the activist post website by the excellent Brandon Tuberville. Um, After the bombings, the 59 Tomahawk missiles, more and more evidence came to light. It became so obvious that the Syrian government had nothing to do with the attacks that any further reference to Khan Sheikhoun should now conjure up memories of an American empire looking for any reason to launch attacks against Syria, so much so that it is ready to slaughter children under the guise of seeking revenge for the killing of children. This is the same process of protecting civilians from violence in Libya by bombing them from the air. Of course, it's right. It's just any excuse to justify the removal of Assad by force. Now, however, there is little doubt left as to whether or not the Syrian government was involved in the attack, since one of the West's proxy terrorists recently confessed to taking part in the staging of the attack, to be blamed on the Syrian government. The terrorist is called Walid Hendi, and he confessed to taking part in fabricating videos and photographs for a Turkish TV channel while working with the so-called White Helmets. This is this terrorist supporting operation that is funded by the West to among many other things, stage apparent aftermaths of attacks, and claim that they came from Assad. You see videos; they're not even good at it. You see videos of children being pulled out of rubble. You don't see them being pulled out. There's a lot of rubble where you can't see what's going on behind, and then suddenly they appear with a child who is has no dust on her, no dirt on her, holding a pristine rag doll. Looks like it's just come out of the shop. It's just ridiculous. But of course, the Western media repeat it. Oh no, what Assad's done, and all that stuff. Anyway, in confessions broadcast by the Syrian TV on Saturday, Al-Hendi said that he joined the White Helmets 3 years ago in return for receiving funds from the so-called local council and finances from Arab Gulf countries. In this new book that I'm writing, I go into the background of these Gulf countries and Israel, America, Britain, and Turkey, and I show what actually connects them all and why they work together. When they, on the surface, you think they'd be apart and opposing each other, or groups of them would be opposing other groups. Hindi said that they were told that there will be chemical attacks, and they were given protective clothing, and they staged a fake chemical attack that was filmed by a Turkish channel, adding that they were filmed by two people who he names, Ibrahim al-Haj and Mohammed al-Sayed, or Sayed, as they sounded sirens and brought stretchers to transport supposedly injured people. Classic White Helmet setup, with the intent of posting these videos online and accusing the Syrian Arab army of carrying out the chemical attack. The terrorist also confessed to taking part in fabricating videos, photos depicting alleged attacks several times. The Syrian news agency then reports on the confession of a second terrorist who said that in similar confessions that terrorists in Aleppo possessed toxic chemicals and that he took part in transporting them. He said that he was asked to transport what he were claimed to be cleaning agents to cover between two neighborhoods to cover up the fact that they were actually transporting dangerous chemicals, adding that after unloading chemicals from two cars, starting with the third, they wanted to know what materials they were transporting because the smells were agitating, particularly since he suffered from asthma. He went on to say that he saw people in silvery clothing, protective masks and long boots transporting the materials to a basement, and they looked through windows and saw them opening barrels and pouring a liquid from them into containers. And when the man in charge of the terrorists noticed that this guy and his cohorts were watching, he expelled them and prevented them from bearing arms. Back in January, Army engineering units uncovered, while combing the old city neighborhoods in Aleppo, an amount of chemical materials of Saudi origin. I mean, it's so open book. Left behind by terrorists, which included sulfur, chlorine, and other chemicals. The revelation is particularly important, the story says, given the possibility for another false flag attack to be repeated in Syria and blamed on the Syrian army by a similar method. In early May, it was reported that white helmets were recently moved into Aretha, or Aria, a town located in Idlib province, accompanied by a number of civilians, including children. The extraordinary abuse of children in the middle of all this is extraordinary, to say the least. Turkey wants US envoy removed in growing spat over Syrian Kurds. And so what we have here is this these different forces all battling over Syria. The Kurds want to take part of Syria away from the Syrian people and say this is ours now. That Turkey clearly wants to do the same. America wants to do the same. And it all comes down to this Greater Israel project, which has been in the planning for decades, which is that the Middle East and the countries around Israel are, if you like, balkanized. They're broken up into small units that are divided on ethnic and religious grounds. It's about diluting any unified challenge to the powers that would be running the Middle East, the powers that we see now from outside, and Israel. The Turkish foreign minister is calling for the removal of the US envoy, claiming he is sympathetic to Kurdish Syrians, as the top congressional Republican demands a swift action after the President Erdogan's security detail violently broke up a protest in Washington, D.C. Well, first of all, the US envoy would be in favor of the Kurds because they want the Kurds to take part of Syria. And of course, Erdogan hates the Kurds. I mean, everyone seems to hate each other. Therefore, it's a phenomenal situation for divide and rule. I don't know if you saw that video in Washington of Erdogan's security guards clashing with protesters. It was amazing to see that this guy thinks you can go into another country and use your security guards to ignore the laws of the country and just do what they like. It says here, tensions are running high between the US and Turkey after the Trump administration announced plans to arm Kurdish Syrian militants with small arms, machine guns, armoured vehicles, and other military hardware. That'd be good for the defence companies, wouldn't it? I mean, the masters of war. Washington sees the militia as best suited for an eventual siege of Raqqa, the Syrian stronghold of Islamic State. And John McCain has condemned Turkish authorities for what they did to the protesters, saying there was no excuse for their thuggish behaviour. This is a man who has never seen any country he didn't want to bomb, John McCain. Very, very disturbed man. This is the United States of America, he said. We do not do this here. You are having a laugh, aren't you? Honestly. Do they know that they're being hypocritical on a monster scale, or are they just got two sides of the brain that don't talk to each other? I don't know. What do they